I'm Brad Harris, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Historic Smithtown. I'm standing in front of the library, a little building that is housed on the grounds of the Smithtown Historical Society. Most people believe that this building is the first library in the town of Smithtown. Actually, there are many other buildings that were used for housing the Smithtown Library when it began. And we'd like to take you on a journey into the past to show you how the library has evolved to become the institution that it is today. The modern Smithtown Library actually was founded in 1907, and that's the official date for when the library began. There were, however, some organizations that were created in town that were lending libraries, and they go back further into the past. About the time of the Civil War, there was a lending library that was in the Halleck Inn, and people paid a fee to join that kind of a group, and you could check a book out, read it, and return it. They might have had a total collection of 100 books. They kept them in a bookshelf, a mobile bookshelf, that the Historical Society actually has today. So if you ever want to look at the very first origins of the Smithtown Library, you'd take a look at those bookshelves, which are in John Lawrence Smith's homestead. The modern library began in 1907 when there was a meeting held in Miss Amelia Blydenberg's house on September 16th. I should say they kicked the whole thing off with a reception. The kickoff, I believe, was in November, and that building was the John Lawrence Smith homestead. They used his former law offices, which had shelving in it already. It had his law books on the shelves, and they just added their own collection to that. Surprisingly, they rapidly outgrew that, and by 1909, they had filled up all the shelving that was available in the house, and their collection was still growing. So they looked for a new location to have a library. And that's when they settled upon what had been Smithtown's reading room. It had been, just as it sounds, a reading room where people could go and read, and usually they were reading the latest issue of the newspaper, which came out on the Long Island Railroad train daily, was brought to that little reading room, and people could go in there and catch up on the news. When the Library Association took it over in 1909, they moved their whole collection into that little room and used it for about a year. Within the end of that time period, they had again outgrown the space available, so they looked for yet another location to put the Library Association. They settled upon the house that we have on the grounds of the Smithtown Historical Society, known as the Ephanitas Smith Tavern. And they used the small wing of the building as their library and housed the books in there. Now that served as Smithtown's library until 1912. In 1911, back when they were in the Ephanitas Smith house, the Library Association applied to the New York State Board of Regents for a charter, and they were granted that in 1911. And what that meant was the private association now became, in essence, a public library. And so from 1911 on, Smithtown now had a public library in the town. The Library Association rapidly ran out of space in the Ephanitas Smith Tavern, and the need for a building in which to house their collection became vital. So the library trustees decided that they would try to have their own library building, and of course they needed a lot of money to construct such a building. Instead of raising the money, they found a benefactress, and her name was Mrs. Prescott Hall Butler. She gave them first the land on which to build a library. Secondly, she got her husband's architectural firm to design a library. And lastly, she got her son to actually do the real work on the drawings for a library. And then she gave them the money with which to do the construction. Again, the space problems began to plague the library. Its collection grew and grew and grew, and they had no place to put the books, and they had to have a new building. And then they began a real campaign to raise the money for a new library. They were not very successful. After a number of years, they had raised maybe $30,000, and they still were far short of their goal. But then New York State came along. The state felt it would be much better to reconstruct that intersection. The library sat in its path. So the library trustees suggested to the state that they might like to purchase the property where the library was located. And sure enough, a deal was struck. The state purchased the land where the library was located, and the library trustees decided to move the library across the road to go to the north side of Middle Country Road to where the library sits today. The original 1912 building is still there. It's now the children's wing of the Smithtown Library. So that's how it all came about in terms of the modern building where it stands today. It incorporates the very first library, 1912, within it, and the new wings were added as time went by, and now we're again at a point where we're expanding the library and building yet another wing on the library as it is.
The Smithtown Special Library District encompasses 4 library buildings. The main library here in Smithtown, as well as 3 branches located in Comac, Kings Park, and Wisconsin. Each library building serves the public with full-service programs, with materials and computer usage for our library patrons. Back in March of 2008, residents of Smithtown voted on a $21 million capital expense project. That project included the expansion and renovation of all 4 of our buildings. The Smithtown project is a 6,000 square foot addition. 3,000 square feet will be used for our new children's room, and 3,000 square feet for a community room, which we'll be able to now increase the number of programs for our public. Not only will the library be expanding its Smithtown main building, but we will also be doing a total renovation of the existing building, very similar to the Comac and Kings Park project. Of course, the Smithtown main building is much larger than the other buildings, so the scope of work will be a little bit more involved. That means that we will be replacing all the light fixtures, the HVAC units, the carpeting, the walls will all be repainted. So when the building is all done, it'll look like a totally new building. The anticipated end date for the project in Smithtown will hopefully coincide with the Kings Park project. So we're looking at a end of 2011, early 2012 finish date. The Comac project encompasses a 3,000 square foot addition. 1,500 square feet of the building will be serving as our new children's room, and 1,500 square feet which will be used for library district storage. The Comac Library branch reopened its building back in May of 2011. When the library was completed, it looks like a seamless building, which means it would be very hard to differentiate between the new addition and the existing building. The Kings Park project is also a 3,000 square foot addition. 1,500 square feet are going to be used for our new children's room, and 1,500 square feet will be used for district storage. That includes a basement. The library will also be totally renovating its building in Kings Park, very similar to the Comac project as well. So the Kings Park project and the Comac project are nearly identical as far as the scope of work that's involved. The library's Wisconsin project is a little bit different from the other 3 projects because currently the library operates out of a rental space located in a strip mall. The library has been operating in that space since the 70s, and back in 2003, the library took possession of a National Guard armory that has been closed since early 1990 from the town of Smithtown. The library then renovated the entire 23,000 square foot building to not only serve as our branch, but also to accommodate the administrative offices, which are currently located in Smithtown. The completion for the entire library project should happen in early 2012, so we'll have our last ribbon cutting ceremony for the Smithtown building at that point. Because things happen here at the library on a daily basis, in order to keep up to date minute by minute, the library has constant updates on its home webpage, which is www.smithlib.org. So you could see all the latest concerts, children's and adult programming, as well as YA programming, and any other kinds of current events that we are currently facilitating. What many people don't realize is that the Smithtown Library houses a Long Island history collection. It's a vast collection of various documents and books that are symbolic to Long Island.
The Long Island Room, which is a local history archives within the larger library, was established in 1926 by Mary Hanley, who donated her husband Richard Hanley's collection of materials about the history and culture of Long Island that he had amassed in the 19th and early 20th century. We have remarkable materials going back 350 years to document the history of this place, physical Long Island, of the Native Americans who lived here, of the Dutch who came, of the English who came from New England, and of how all these cultures merged and made what became Long Island. And we have about 8,000 books, a couple hundred boxes of documents of various sorts, photographs and things before them, many, many atlases, 750 maps. And when you put all of this together, you get a truly alive picture of Long Island as a place and as a culture. In our town, there are several institutions that house materials about the history of the place. We have the Smithtown Historical Society, we have Town Hall, and we have the Long Island Room of the library. And collectively, we have the record of the town of Smithtown through time. And so each institution helps support the other. And what one doesn't have, you can call the other to see if they have it. And working together, we can help anyone who has needs.
With technology running at a rapid pace and the quest for knowledge as a constant, the library always faces the challenge in maintaining that pace. That's what we try and provide, whatever's current out there. Anything that will attract people into our buildings is what we will offer to our library patrons.
The electronic format is not in its infancy. I'd say it's in its early teenagerhood. People who were born when this was alive expect this as a matter of course. And we're in a society where people don't try to be part of the process but want products. Knowledge is not instant gratification. And any kind of thorough knowledge that people would want to acquire about a topic takes a little bit of time and thought and rifling through different kinds of information. Not everything in the compiled culture of mankind is going to be on an e-book. But if you go to a library, then you can, at the present moment, and if directors still decide to keep books and to keep librarians to help interpret materials, if they decide to keep that part of the collection and not just make it an electronic place, you can go to a shelf and get 10 books out about a topic, look through them and see what it is you want to learn and put it in a context and bring that with you. It's your own information. When something else comes up, you can feed from that information and learn more. Another thing that's important is the tactile nature of books and of a library experience, especially for children, because children are sponges and they're always using all of their senses to absorb what they can to learn. And if you put a kid in front of a TV or give them an e-book, they don't get to touch it. They don't get to go back and forth. They don't get to scribble in it. It doesn't become theirs. If kids come to the library and they go to story time and they interact with other kids and they get to touch books and do puzzles, then they're feeding their senses. So libraries are very important in that way.
When I became a town historian back in 1978, I never grew up in this town. I knew nothing about the past of this town, and I really had to immerse myself in the past to get where I am today. And I couldn't have done that without a library. The things that I usually dig into and find out about the past are not on the internet. It's not something you can just click a button and read a new article that somebody's written, because I'm investigating ground that people have never written about. And without those resources, I would really be lost, and you can only find those in a library.
It's important that a library be here for the community because it's a community center. It's a nonprofit community center that has nothing to offer but unbiased information and unbiased programs. It doesn't have to serve anyone but the community that funds it. Some people spend a lot of time here and use all of our collections. People use the internet. People tutor here. I think it's a really important part of Smithtown. I think it's a fine library, and I know that the staff who work here are really dedicated to making it the best it can be to help people.
The uniqueness of the library is that we offer our services and programs to anyone. With the use of your library card, you have access to anything. When you help someone, we don't answer the question, we guide them to the material, but when they come and thank you and they mean it, that's what makes it so special, that you made a difference in someone's life.
I hope you enjoyed our journey into the past and a look at the history of the Smithtown Library. For Historic Smithtown, I'm Brad Harris. Thanks for watching.